Oh, Canada, the land of moose, mounties, and maple syrup, is also the setting for tons of great books. So put on your comfiest toque and let's talk about novels set in Canada, eh? First up is Hatchet by Gary Paulson. I read this in 5th grade and it's stuck with me ever since. It's the story of a young teen named Brian who's flying a small plane to visit his dad, I think, in Canada, when the pilot has a sudden heart attack. And then Brian somewhat successfully lands the plane in a lake, in a forest, in the middle of Canadian nowhere. Basically, all Brian has with him is a hatchet, so he's in for a Lord of the Flies type of survival situation, which is definitely why I like this book as a young kid. There's something about young men trying to figure out how not to die that appealed to young Kevin. Anyway, Brian's got to figure out how to make fire, feed himself, and try to get rescued. It's a bit like Tom Hanks in the movie Castaway, or the TV show Alone, which I'm a huge fan of, by the way. Survivalists will always fascinate me because there's just no way I could ever do any of that, like build a shelter, forage, hunt, and stay sane all by myself. It's not happening. Next up is The River by Peter Heller. This is another survival story that follows two college friends from Texas, Wynn and Jack, on their remote canoe trip to Canada. It starts out as this relaxing journey, but quickly turns dangerous as they meet a mysterious couple and then have to deal with a spreading wildfire. There's beautiful descriptions of the scenery that'll transport you to the Great White North, plus a great look at the bonds of friendship, the unrelenting power of nature, and what happens when you have to make tough decisions in high-stress environments. And I think one or both, maybe, of the two main characters went to my alma mater, Texas A&M, or they at least in the book wear some kind of Aggie gear, so I've got to point that out as well. Whoop! Third on my list is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. Here's a sci-fi dystopian novel set near Toronto, or at least the Great Lakes region of southern Canada. It covers multiple timelines, mainly before and after a flu pandemic wipes out most of humanity. It also features a couple of different POVs, including the main character Kristen, who's an actress that joins a traveling theater troupe, and their goal is to try and keep humanity's soul alive through their art in this post-apocalyptic world. And of course, not everyone in this dark new future cares about our prior culture, so there are attempts to squash the troupe's efforts. Ultimately, the book is about personal and collective resilience. It also focuses on the need to appreciate art and beauty, no matter how bleak the situation. Otherwise, we'll lose who we are as people. And this little civilization we have is really fragile, so, connecting with others in the past or the present is a way of keeping previous generations alive. Fourth on the list is Far North by Marcel Thoreau. Some environmental catastrophe or global warming event turns the Earth into a not so great place to live in this book. Makepeace is the sheriff of a tiny town in the frozen wilderness of Canada, flipping a couple of classic Western elements on their head. And because more folks are heading north for the promise of a better life, Makepeace's town is getting more crowded and violent. Then Makepeace witnesses a plane crash, which is something totally unexpected, and she meets a character named Ping. And these two events, along with a handful of clever twists, give Makepeace a greater purpose. It's, again, set in this dystopian world that shows off the beauty and brutality of this rugged landscape, as well as the unbreakability of the human spirit. Civilization is, all but gone here, but there are still sparks of hope that keep Makepeace and the other characters moving forward to a goal that they probably won't ever see realized in their lifetimes. Up next is Moon of the Crusted Snow by Wabgashig Rice. This is a low-key thriller that sees the beginning of the apocalypse through the eyes of a remote indigenous town in present-day Ontario. The residents of this Anishinaabe community have lost so much in their history, including their traditional homeland. They've been survivors for a long time already, so when things start to go wrong in the book and they learn bits and pieces of what's happening in the outside world, their isolation and self-reliance turns into major advantages. As for the characters, the main one is Evan, and he's kind of an average Joe who still does some traditional things like hunting to put food on the table for his family. And a lot of the characters are kind of like that. They're believable, ordinary folks. And it's the realism of the characters and the plot that really makes the story tick. It's not an action-packed, unput-downable book by any means. It's a slow burn that builds up to these tense scenes with this frigid Ontario setting, giving a feeling of being closed off, being isolated from everybody else. And as the book goes along, you kind of realize that the big question that they're going to have to face is, are they going to continue isolating themselves from everyone else in the world, or are they going to be welcoming and let outsiders in? Number 6 on the list is Mem by Bethany Morrow. This original sci-fi novella is set in 1920s Montreal, but it feels like the future. That's because in this alternate Canada, memories can be extracted from people, and those memories capture a certain moment from their source's life, becoming beings unto themselves. But these memory people are limited, surviving for just a short while as these simple shadows that are only slightly aware of the world around them. However, Elsie is one of these mems, and she's unique. She's her own person, outgrowing this shadow form that I talked about into like a fully fledged, unique individual. But Elsie can't do whatever she wants. She has to live where these mems are stored in a place called the Vault. And she could also potentially be rewritten and wiped from existence if her source so chooses. So she effectively is kind of in this limbo of existing, but, you know, in just a minute, she could not. The book is all about what it means to be a person and a unique, independent individual. And as any good sci-fi like this, you know, there are lots of stories that are kind of in this similar vein, Elsie is forced at one point to confront the real person that she came from and come to grips what it means for the both of them. Next up is The Call of the Wild by Jack London. You probably heard of or already read this classic adventure novel. It features Buck, a domesticated dog, as its main character, and it's set mainly in Yukon, Canada. The story is about how Buck has to switch from this cushy life in California to the tough life of an Alaskan sled dog during the Klondike Gold Rush. He deals with the harsh Canadian wilderness, cruel dog owners, and rival dogs, eventually tapping into his primal nature. It's a short book at under 200 pages that quickly chronicles Buck's transformation. And you'll get a taste of London's thoughts on the nature of animals, the brutality of Canada's frozen wilderness, and how only the fittest survive. And of course, the movie adaptation, which I think came out a few years ago with Harrison Ford, is a good one if you haven't watched it, so be sure to check that out if you can. Number 8 on my list is The Annual Migration Clouds, and this is by Premi Mohammed. In the cold wilderness of Canada, after some climate catastrophe, kind of like some of the other books we've already talked about, Reed and her tiny community are scraping by. And what makes it even more difficult is that Reed lives with Cad, and Cad is this mysterious, mind-altering fungi that seems to have a mind of its own. But now there's the chance of a lifetime for Reed because she's been accepted to a faraway university. If it does actually exist, of course, she's not 100% sure of that. So she has to make a decision to stay and help her family and community or abandon everyone for this dream that might not actually exist. Overall, it's a tense novel with, a couple of slow parts scattered in between. And it just kind of begs the question of, should you, if you're given the chance, step outside of your comfort zone and go beyond that phase of your life, or stick to what you know and play it safe? Next up is 15 Dogs by Andre Alexis. In this book, the gods, Apollo and Hermes, make a bet. And basically, Apollo believes that if any animal was as intelligent as a human, this level of smartness, that they'd be unhappy. So the nearest thing they see is a Canadian vet clinic. So these poor 15 Canadian dogs are given human-like intelligence, and just we follow their story and see what happens. It's written from a dog's perspective, which is really unique, but that doesn't mean it's shallow by any means. The book touches on deeper topics like individual versus group dynamics, growth versus stagnation, and the relationship between being oblivious of something and being happy about knowing what you are, where you are, who you are. And last but not least is Wolf Road by Beth Lewis. This keeps kind of happening with these Canadian books. I don't know why, but in this one there's this huge global war that sets people back into a time before technology where it's every person for themselves. think reality TV survival shows like I've already talked about. And the main character is Elka, and when she was 7 years old and lost in the woods, she was rescued by this man that she knows only as the Trapper. And over the next 10 years, he turns her into a tough survivor in this harsh environment, teaching her how to hunt and stay alive. And eventually she kind of comes to see him as this father figure. And then there's this kind of twist. Elka realizes something about the Trapper, who he is and what he is to her, and it totally shifts how she sees him. And as I've said before, the story is amazing, but the setting also is just gorgeous, beautiful, even though this dark, gritty world of feels like a 19th century lumberjack type of vibe going on. It's kind of got this Mother Nature, the indifference of Mother Nature and the consequences of humanity's actions, how it can make the wilderness even more inhospitable. What other books are set in Canada? Let me know in the comments. I truly appreciate all you hosers who take the time to chip in your literary knowledge. Otherwise, I'm just sitting here by myself researching stuff on the internet, and that's not half as fun. Anyway, happy reading.